Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel for another Wargaming Terrain tutorial. Now in the past week I got a message regarding my oil drums and essentially the very real problem about them, which was the lack of weight. Now this is true for probably quite a few of my builds so far, and it came up again this week when I was working on my new build video. These buildings here are essentially just foam board and cereal box cardboard. So a lack of weight here is a real problem that I need to sort of work out. So this week I thought I'd take a look at some of my previous terrain, have a quick look at this new piece I'm making, and find some subtle ways to add weight to this terrain. So let's take a look. Now there's obviously a couple of practical reasons for why you'd want to weigh down your terrain. Now you don't want it to be, easily sort of knocked around the table if you're moving miniatures and stuff. Now you don't want it to obviously blow across the table either, so as your enemy sighs in defeat. You don't want terrain moving around the table, which is a real problem for some of this stuff as it's just literally foam board. But there's also the added benefit of it actually just feels better to hold and move around when you are placing it. Now we're going to start off with this small piece of terrain here, this little concrete barrier I made ages ago. Now this one's a little tough to add any significant weight to it, but I did find these little screws here. You can just push them in and then drive them in the last little bit with a screwdriver. This doesn't affect at all how they sit in on the table, and they'll screw straight into that foam. So long as you're making sure you're not using screws that are too long, you should be able to just fit as many as you can in there. Now I found with this one here, with the bunker build, this was easy to get the screws in. I just found pushing them, 90% of the way in and then just using the screwdriver. Didn't add a lot of weight to this piece though. I think there's 6 screws in there and it was a little bit underweight still, so what I actually did was went in with some hot glue and just some rocks out of the garden. This is perfect. This works really well. You could obviously use washers or something if you wanted to. You'll see in some of the shots I've got a range of different materials ready to go there for anything that might go into these buildings. Now this one here is a little bit bigger, a little bit harder to add weight to a piece of terrain that doesn't have a base on it. Same thing again, we're actually just going to use rocks again. We're going to hide them in the corners of the building. When you're placing these, you just want to make sure that they're not protruding at the bottom so that your building will continue to sit flat. Now with this one here particularly, you probably shouldn't need to prime those or paint those rocks at all. They should be well enough hidden that you won't see them. Now with this, with trees, one thing I've done in the past is to build a small rock base. So you can see here I've just got a little piece of MDF and just some rocks again from the garden. I just glue those down with PVA glue and then with my wire tree bases, they just glue straight onto that. Now I've done a similar technique with this little signpost I've got here. Now you see there's a little base around the bottom of that. That's actually just aquarium rocks or aquarium pebbles. That I've just dropped into a drop of PVA glue and then just slowly built it up into a little mound of rocks there. There's not a lot of weight in that, but it certainly holds it upright and it's enough to look cool on the table. Now I did rubble piles a while ago and I didn't use bases for those, but I found one way to actually add some weight to those rubble piles was to glue some old hex nuts down onto a small base. So again, cereal box cardboard. I've just put a little divot into the base of the tin foil, which I use to sort of pad out the rubble pile, and that'll add a little bit of weight underneath all that stuff that you glue on. So that's a really great way to add some weight. Now for these pieces, which are the ones I'm working on for the new video, one thing I thought about was could I add barrels to them, because none of those previous techniques, gluing rocks, anything like that is really going to add substantial weight unless I make it quite obvious, with large rocks and that sort of thing. So went back to the oil drums, figured we could add some of those as scatter terrain onto those new buildings that we're making. So what I did was just glue down a hex nut onto the piece of paper. These straws, or these barrels, sorry, just made from straws. I'll link the video just above. They look pretty crap at this stage, but they actually come together quite well, and once they're painted up, they're quite good for what I need, and I can make stacks of them really easily. So all I do is basically just hot glue down the straw onto the hex nut that I put on the paper. Then I cut out that base piece so that it's trimmed with the straw. Like I said, these don't look very good at all when they're being made, but once they're painted up, they don't look too bad. So then I'm just adding in a little drop of hot glue into the straw, dropping in another hex nut, pushing it down so it's flat so I can fit as many of these little suckers in there as I can. And I'm just going to continue that process till I get to the very top. making sure the hex nuts aren't protruding out the bottom of the barrel. Then just one little last drop of hot glue on there, we'll push it down onto the piece of paper, and then again we'll just cut it off there and cut out the base and trim it all up so that it looks nice and pretty. And there they are, ready to go on the base. You can see I've used one of those squashed barrels that I made in that video. I've actually got 3 hex nuts in that one, so not quite as many as the other, but I've also used a pallet here, which is another construction from that same video with the barrels. This one I was actually able to jam in 6 hex nuts into the inside of that pallet, so that'll hide up nicely. Here I've just glued down some hex nuts onto the base for our ruined brick wall here, and I'm just going to use some sandbags that some leftover sandbags from last week's video, or sorry, not last week's video, but the last video, and just cover up those hex nuts and make a small pile of sandbags there. So with those hex nuts on that side and, you know, a conveniently placed barrel on the other, we've actually added significant weight to that piece of terrain. So now, I'm not saying this is a heavy piece of terrain now, but it is certainly a lot weightier than it was, and this goes for all of those pieces that we've just upgraded. Even the little concrete barrier, it still doesn't weigh a lot now, but it weighs, you know, 3 or 4 times what it did before. Like I said, makes them a little bit more practical on the table, and it also, they feel good to hold and move around and place. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found a couple of helpful tips in this one. Remember to hit subscribe as well, and I will see you in the next video.